Usually when you are presented with a contract like, whether it's for a new software update on your phone or signing up for a monthly gym membership, there is this almost uncontrollable human instinct to just scroll rapidly to the very bottom and hit accept.
Oh, absolutely. We all do it.
Right. Because we want the thing. So we bypass all the rules just to get to the thing.
Yeah, it's the path of least resistance. We basically treat the document as a mere formality. Like, it's just a minor annoyance standing between us and the actual goal,
Exactly.
The terms of service are always someone else's problem until something breaks.
Right. But then you step into the world of real estate.
Yeah.
You're buying or selling a home. And suddenly, that whole scroll and accept strategy is just a recipe for absolute disaster.
Oh, 100%.
Because the stakes are massive.
Yeah.
I mean, this often represents the largest financial transaction of a person's entire life. And yet we're looking at a contractual landscape that, for most people, honestly feels like it's written in a completely foreign language.
It really is. It's the absolute definition of high-stakes legal translation.
Yeah.
Every single checkbox, every blank line, it all carries immense financial and logistical weight for everyone involved.
Which is terrifying if you don't know what you're looking at.
Exactly. If you gloss over a single paragraph, you could be accidentally giving away thousands of dollars, or even inadvertently promising to hand over property you don't even legally own.
Wow, yeah. And that is exactly what we're tackling today. Welcome to today's deep dive. If you are preparing to buy a home, maybe you're looking to sell, or, if you're just insanely curious about the hidden mechanics of how massive life-changing transactions actually work, you are in the right place.
You definitely are.
Our mission today is to take the foundational opening sections of a standard real estate purchase contract and just translate them into plain English.
And we're going to do this entirely impartially.
Right, no sides here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are not here to offer personal opinions or, give legal advice on what you should or shouldn't negotiate.
Yeah, right, we're just decoding it.
Yeah, our goal is to provide a purely objective look at the mechanics of the agreement. We want to explain the underlying architecture of the deal so you understand exactly what matters most to both the buyer and the seller.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Before a single dollar changes hands, the contract has to establish with absolute certainty exactly who is involved.
Right.
Right at the top, it requires the printed names of the buyer and the seller, which, is straightforward enough.
Usually, yeah.
But right beneath that, there is a very specific checkbox for dual agency. And if you are out there looking at houses this weekend, this is a box you really need to pay close attention to.
You really do.
Because dual agency occurs when the exact same real estate agent represents both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction.
Yeah, and what's fascinating about dual agency is not just what it is, but actually where it lives in the document.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, it's addressed immediately. By requiring a checkbox right in the opening section, the contract is forcing full transparency before anyone even looks at a purchase price.
Oh, I see. Because it fundamentally changes the whole dynamic of the relationship, right?
Absolutely.
Like, if an agent represents both sides, they can't be a fierce, singular advocate for the buyer's lowest price while they are simultaneously fighting for the seller's highest price.
Right, so it's impossible.
They become more of a neutral mediator.
Precisely. It alters the fiduciary duty. The contract forces both the buyer and the seller to acknowledge and, physically consent to this modified structure of representation right up front.
So nobody can say they didn't know.
Exactly. If a dispute arises later, neither party can claim they were unaware that they were sharing an agent.
Okay, that makes sense. So once the who is established, the contract demands intense precision regarding the what.
Yes, the property itself.
Right. And here is where we start seeing the difference between how civilians talk about property and how the law views it.
Oh, it's a huge difference.
Yeah, like the contract asks for the street address, sure. But more importantly, it requires the permanent index number, or PIN. I always think of the PI as a property's legal DNA, whereas the street address is just its clothing.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it, honestly.
Thanks.
An address is basically just a routing instruction for the post office.
Right.
It doesn't tell you anything about actual legal boundaries. The permanent index number, though, that's how the county or municipality identifies the exact mathematical parcel of land that's being transferred.
Because addresses can be super misleading.
Oh, very.
You might have a house on a corner lot where the physical fence extends a few feet onto, say, city property.
Happens all the time.
Right. So the address implies you own everything inside that fence, But the PI dictates the cold, hard legal reality of the dirt you actually possess.
Exactly. The PI ties directly back to the legal description and the tax records for the real estate. It's the definitive legal identifier.
It's the real truth.
Yeah, it ensures that the seller is transferring the precise parcel of land they own. Nothing more, nothing less.
Okay, and speaking of the exact property, the contract gets incredibly granular about parking and storage, which I found fascinating.
It really does.
It doesn't just say it comes with a parking spot. It requires the parties to identify the exact number of spaces, the space numbers, and crucially, their legal type.
Right.
Like, there are check boxes for a deeded space, a limited common element, or an assigned space.
Yes.
Now, if I'm a buyer and I pull my car into spot number 42 every single day, why do I care which box is checked?
Yeah.
I mean, a spot is a spot, isn't it?
Well, it might look exactly the same to your car, but legally the difference is massive.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Let's look at the mechanics of it. A deeded space means that the parking spot is an actual separate piece of real estate.
Okay.
It literally has its own permanent index number, its own legal DNA, as you put it earlier.
Wait, really? A parking spot has a PI in it?
Yes. So when a seller transfers a deeded space, they are transferring actual legal ownership of that specific patch of concrete directly to the buyer. You literally get a deed for the house and a separate deed for the concrete.
Okay, wow. So it's mine. I fully own it.
You do.
What happens mechanically if the assigned box is checked instead?
So if a space is assigned, the seller doesn't actually own the concrete at all.
They don't.
No. The Governing Homeowners Association owns that parking lot. The seller simply has a revocable right to use that specific space.
Oh, okay. So it's essentially like having a locker at a country club.
Exactly.
Like you don't own the locker room. The club does. You just have the club's permission to put your gym bag in locker 42 while you're a member in good standing.
That is the exact mechanism. You are transferring a membership privilege, not actual real estate.
Wow.
And checking the correct box here prevents massive post-closing disputes.
I can imagine.
Yeah, for a seller, it ensures they aren't accidentally breaching the contract by promising to sell a piece of land they don't even legally own. And for a buyer, it clarifies exactly what assets they are actually acquiring. So, they aren't completely surprised when the HOA decides to reassign all the parking spaces 2 years down the line.
That distinction alone proves why reading the fine print is so critical.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we know who's involved, and we have established the exact legal parameters of the dirt, the concrete, and the buildings.
Right.
Naturally, this necessitates figuring out how it will all be paid for. Moving into the flow of funds.
The fun part.
Yeah, the contract outlines the total purchase price. But immediately after that, it introduces a mechanism called credit at closing.
Yes.
Now, this is where a seller agrees to credit the buyer a specific dollar amount at the closing table, usually to help cover the buyer's closing costs or, like, prepaid expenses.
Right, it is a very common negotiation tool.
But the contract places a strict objective boundary on this generosity, right?
It does. It explicitly states that this credit is provided only if the buyer's lender permits it on the final settlement statement. If the lender doesn't permit the full amount, well, the credit is legally reduced to whatever lesser amount the lender does allow.
See, this is a fascinating mechanism to me.
Yeah.
Because if a seller wants to be generous, or if the two parties negotiated a deal where the seller kicks back, say, $10,000 to help a cash-strapped buyer cover their loan fees, why does the bank hold a veto power over that private arrangement?
So to understand why, you really have to look at the transaction from the lender's risk perspective.
Okay.
The bank is the one putting up the vast majority of the capital, right? So they use this veto power as an anti-fraud measure, basically to ensure two main things.
Okay, what's the first?
First, they want to ensure the buyer has actual skin in the game, meaning the buyer is contributing their own actual funds to the transaction and not just financing their entire down payment through some hidden seller kickback.
Ah, right. Because if things get tough, a buyer who used their own life savings is way less likely to walk away than a buyer who essentially got the house with zero out-of-pocket costs because the seller just covered everything.
Exactly. It's about risk. And second, lenders use this to prevent artificial asset inflation.
How so?
Well, imagine a scenario where a house is legitimately worth $400,000, but the buyer and seller write up a contract for $450,000 with an agreement that the seller will just give the buyer $50,000 back in a closing credit.
Okay, I see. So the buyer gets 50 grand in cash to, like, renovate the kitchen,
Hmm.
and the seller still gets their $400,000. Everybody wins, right?
Everybody except the bank.
Right.
Because the bank is now loaning money based on an inflated $450,000 purchase price.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So if the buyer defaults the very next day, the bank forecloses on an asset that is only worth $400,000 on the open market. They instantly lose $50,000.
Wow, okay.
So the lender intensely reviews these credits to ensure the loan-to-value ratio remains accurate and completely secure.
That makes total sense.
And for the seller, this clause acts as a shield. It protects them from being in breach of contract if the buyer's bank suddenly steps in and forces a reduction in that agreed-upon credit.
Right, so it protects the integrity of the bank's collateral and protects the seller from defaulting due to the bank's strict rules. It's actually a very elegant solution.
It really is.
Okay, moving down the financial chain, we hit earnest money. Now, I like to think of earnest money as a financial hostage.
I love that analogy.
It's a deposit made by the buyer to demonstrate they are actually serious, ensuring they don't just walk away from the deal on a whim.
That is a very apt way to look at it. The contract dictates that this good faith deposit can be tendered in stages, like an initial amount due shortly after acceptance, and sometimes a larger secondary amount due after a specific milestone.
Like after the inspection, maybe.
Exactly, like an inspection.
But the mechanics of where this money sits are super crucial. The contract specifies that this hostage money cannot just go straight into the seller's personal checking account.
No, absolutely not.
It must be held in trust by an escrowee, which is usually a neutral third-party brokerage or title company.
Right. The escrowee acts as a neutral guardian of those funds. And the reason this mechanism is explicitly spelled out is to prevent utter chaos if the deal falls apart.
Right.
Let's say a buyer backs out because they lose their job, which is a contingency covered later in the document. If the earnest money was sitting in the seller's personal account, the seller might refuse to return it just out of spite or frustration.
Which would force the buyer to literally sue the seller just to get their own deposit back.
Exactly. And no one wants that. So by placing it with an escrowee, the contract ensures the money is secure.
Okay.
However, the escrowee isn't a judge. If the deal terminates, the escrowee generally requires mutual written direction from both the buyer and the seller before they will release those funds to anyone.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it creates a controlled stalemate. It forces the parties to resolve their issues according to the contract's actual terms, rather than just resorting to a foot race to the bank.
Wow, okay. So to bring the financial picture into final focus, the contract utilizes a formula to determine the exact balance due at closing.
Yes.
It takes the total purchase price, subtracts that earnest money hostage we just talked about, applies any of those lender-approved closing credits, and then it factors in something called prorations.
Right.
We hear that word a lot, but let's explain the mechanics of a proration for you listening. In real estate, you are constantly racking up bills simply by existing things like property taxes or association dues.
Correct. And those bills just don't neatly align with your closing date.
No, they never do.
For example, property taxes are often paid in arrears, meaning you pay this year's taxes next year.
Right. So if I buy a house from you on June 30th, you live there for exactly half the year. But the tax bill for that time hasn't even been generated yet.
Exactly.
So a proration essentially mathematically slices that future bill directly down the middle.
That's right.
The contract dictates that you, the seller, give me a credit at the closing table for your half of the year's taxes. That way, when the full bill arrives on my doorstep months later, I am not paying out of pocket for the months you were living there.
That is exactly how it works. It basically mathematically balances the scales of ownership on a daily basis.
It's so clean.
And once all that math is done, the final balance must be paid in what the contract defines as good funds.
Good funds. Meaning, I can't just slide a personal check across the table and hope it clears.
Definitely not. Good funds legally dictates a wire transfer or a certified cashier's check.
Okay.
It provides objective certainty to the seller that the money is real, verified, and instantaneously available before they sign over the deed to their home.
Makes total sense. So the bank is happy, the escrow agent has managed the deposit, the math is done, and the balance has been wired. But the transaction isn't truly complete until the professionals get paid and the keys physically change hands.
Right.
Which brings us to the logistics of closing.
Here we go.
The contract includes a section titled Seller Contribution to Buyer Brokerage Compensation. This is where the mechanics of agent payment are just laid bare.
And it does so by giving the seller very clear, unavoidable options.
Right.
They can check a box to pay a percentage of the purchase price to the buyer's brokerage, or they can check a box to pay a specific flat dollar amount.
Okay.
Or, and this is important, they can explicitly check a box stating that the seller will not pay any buyer brokerage compensation whatsoever.
See, I think this formatting is brilliant because it forces a conversation.
It really does.
There is zero ambiguity about where the funds for the buyer's representation are actually coming from. If the seller checks the box saying they won't pay, well, the buyer immediately knows they're on the hook for their agent's fee, and they can adjust their purchase price offer accordingly.
Exactly. It creates absolute clarity on the allocation of transactional costs right up front.
Which is great.
Next, the contract actually dictates the geography of the closing itself.
Yes, this part is interesting.
While the exact date is mutually agreed upon, the contract states the physical location must be at the escrow office of the title insurance company that is situated nearest to the real estate.
See, I always wondered about that. Why nearest to the real estate? Why not just the nicest office in downtown or wherever is convenient?
Well, it is an objective standard designed to prevent logistical weaponization.
Logistical weaponization.
Yeah, you don't want a scenario where a spiteful seller demands a closing location 3 hours away just to totally inconvenience the buyer.
Oh, wow. People actually do that.
You'd be surprised. So by mandating the closest title office to the property, the contract centers the administrative burden around the physical location of the asset being transferred.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So the paperwork is signed at the nearest title company, but what about the house itself? The contract dictates that possession is delivered at closing. But it defines possession with a very strict mechanism.
It does.
It states that possession is legally deemed delivered only when the seller and all occupants have vacated the real estate and delivered the keys to the buyer.
Yes. This is a critical legal threshold. Possession is not a conceptual idea. It is a strict physical reality.
Right.
Unless a specific alternative arrangement, like maybe a post-closing rental agreement, is checked in a later paragraph, standard closing and possession happen concurrently.
Okay, but let me push back on this because the real world is messy.
Sure.
Let's say I'm the seller. The closing happens at 10 a.m., the wire hits your account, but my moving truck broke down.
Oh.
Yeah, so I'm still actively hauling boxes out of the basement at 2 p.m.
Technically, I haven't fully vacated. What happens?
Contractually speaking, you are in breach.
Really?
Absolutely. The term vacated means absolutely everyone and everything not explicitly included in the sale is gone. Leaving behind a basement full of old paint cans and spare tires means you have not vacated the property.
Wow, even just some paint cans. Yes. For the buyer, the strict liability rule guarantees they aren't handed the keys to a home they can't immediately inhabit.
That makes sense.
And for the seller, it creates an unyielding deadline. The physical handover of an empty house must mirror the electronic transfer of the funds.
Which naturally begs the question.
Right.
Once the seller is completely gone and all their personal boxes are on the truck, what exactly are they contractually required to leave behind?
Ah, the stuff.
Right. You walk into your new empty house.
Yeah.
What is actually left inside? The contract leaves absolutely nothing to the imagination here.
Nothing.
There is this massive, extensive section dedicated to fixtures and personal property at no added value.
And it relies on a highly detailed master checklist. You know, historically, the rule of thumb was simple. If an item was bolted down or hardwired, it was a fixture and stayed with the real estate.
Right.
If it was freestanding, it was personal property and the seller just took it with them.
The old analogy was, if you could theoretically pick the house up and turn it upside down, whatever fell to the ceiling was yours to take, and whatever stayed attached belonged to the buyer.
Yep, that was the classic test.
But looking at this modern checklist in the contract, that old analogy completely falls apart.
Oh, it absolutely does. The line between a physical fixture and a piece of personal technology has completely blurred in modern homes.
Exactly. I mean, the checklist obviously covers ovens, refrigerators, and washers.
Yeah.
But it now explicitly lists items like smart thermostats, video doorbells, invisible pet fences, and electric vehicle charging stations.
Yes.
A video doorbell can be unscrewed in 30 seconds.
Right.
A smart thermostat is essentially a specialized iPad lightly snapped onto a wall plate. They would definitely fall if you turned the house upside down.
They absolutely would. And this is exactly why the contract evolved.
Yep.
A smart thermostat is hardware, sure, but its core value is the software and the connectivity. Sellers were taking them because they felt like personal electronics, but buyers were furious because the heating system they just bought suddenly had no control interface at all.
Right, you can't even turn on the heat.
Exactly. By explicitly listing these modern gray area items on a master checklist, the contract totally eliminates the need for assumptions.
Right.
If the video doorbell box is checked, it stays, regardless of how easily it can be uninstalled.
And it goes even further, explicitly including things like planted vegetation.
Yes.
So if a seller has a prize-winning rose bush in the front yard, they can't just dig it up and put it in a pot on moving day unless they specifically excluded it in the blank lines provided.
Exactly. The blank lines for other items included and items not included, they ensure that any uniquely disputed items, like maybe a specific dining room chandelier or a freestanding garage workbench, are just documented in writing. No surprises.
But the true focal point of this entire physical property section really relies on how the contract defines operating condition. The seller warrants that all these included items will be in operating condition at possession. But let's look at the actual mechanics of what that means, because it is wildly counterintuitive to a lot of buyers.
It is perhaps the most critical sentence for managing expectations in the entire opening section.
Right, so let's say I'm a buyer doing my final walkthrough.
Okay.
I check the water heater that the seller agreed to leave. I look at the manufacturer's sticker, and this thing is 25 years old.
Ancient.
It is ancient. It is rusting at the bottom, and it is a decade past its statistical lifespan. Now, as a buyer, my instinct is to demand a credit because I'm going to have to replace it the second I move in. Does the contract support me?
Contractually speaking, no. You have absolutely no legal standing to demand a credit for that.
Really?
Really. The contract explicitly dictates the mechanism. A system or item shall be deemed to be in operating condition if it performs the function for which it is intended, regardless of age, and does not constitute a threat to health or safety.
Regardless of age. Those three words do a phenomenal amount of heavy lifting.
They do.
It essentially means the contract doesn't care about efficiency, aesthetics, or expected lifespan. It only cares about a binary outcome. Does it perform its intended function?
Precisely. For a seller, this definition provides massive legal protection. If the buyer points out that the water heater is a quarter-century old, the seller simply has to demonstrate that it successfully makes hot water and isn't actively leaking natural gas.
Wow.
They are legally absolved of having to provide an item with a long remaining useful life.
So what you're saying is, for a buyer, this clause forces a hard reality check.
A very hard one.
It dictates that a fully functional antique is a legally acceptable component of the real estate transaction. It forces the buyer to understand that they are acquiring the property in its current functional state, not a newly renovated, highly efficient version of it.
Exactly. It draws a stark, unyielding legal line between something that is broken and something that is simply old.
Right.
If it turns on and does its job without causing a fire, the seller has fulfilled their contractual obligation.
That is fascinating. It completely reframes the mindset you need when walking through a house.
Oh, absolutely.
You aren't just evaluating the aesthetic appeal.
Yeah.
You have to evaluate functional utility versus imminent lifespan failure, knowing the contract won't protect you from the latter.
By breaking down these mechanics, I think it becomes clear that every single line, checkbox, and definition in these opening sections is engineered to eliminate ambiguity.
Yeah.
It just replaces emotional assumptions with a rigid, shared rulebook.
Which brings us right back to where we started. We are so heavily conditioned by our daily lives to just scroll to the bottom of the terms and conditions and click accept.
Right.
But when it comes to the real estate contract, the architecture of the entire deal is hiding in plain sight in these opening sections.
It really is.
Consider the massive psychological gap between what a buyer visualizes in their head when they purchase a quote-unquote new home and what this contract actually guarantees them on paper.
Yeah.
The contract doesn't promise a pristine, worry-free future. It guarantees a property where the components simply perform their basic intended functions, regardless of how incredibly close they might be to failing the very next day.
It's a sobering thought.
So how might understanding this contractual reality change the way you inspect, view, or even negotiate a property in the future? When you know that old but working is the actual legal standard, how does that shift your entire strategy?
It is definitely something to think about before you sign your name on the dotted line.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the foundation of the real estate purchase contract. We hope it helped translate the legal mechanics into something clear and actionable. Until next time, keep reading the fine print.